தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
On behalf of International Eelam Tamil, I would like to welcome all of you, especially the panelists who have come here to express their solidarity to the Tamil national struggle. Before going on with the formal proceedings of the day, I would like to observe 2 minutes of silence, remembering all those people who were killed in the Tamil homeland, particularly the freedom fighters, martyrs, the people who voluntarily decided to stay in the homeland, in the Tamil state, despite the fact that they knew very well they will be killed. So we are remembering a people, not in abstract terms, but in concrete terms, the people who belong to a land, the people who have a distinct nationality, the people who resisted to protect their nationality, homeland, and the state. So I would request you to stand up and remember these people as a people who belong to a particular land, a nation, and a state. We have 3 sessions today. The first session will be on the theme of an international independent investigation on war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And the second session will be on different forms or different phases of genocide. And the third session will be focusing on the need for a UN-mediated referendum in the Tamil homeland as a way forward to sustainable peace in the island of Sri Lanka. Each session will have around 10 panelists who will be speaking for 10 minutes. And these panelists are parliamentarians, representatives from different political parties, academics, lawyers, human rights activists. Now, I would like you to keep your questions at the end of each session. You will have 10 to 15 minutes of time for questions and answers. So after each session we will have a break and then we will proceed with the second session. Introducing the first session on an international independent investigation on war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, let me very briefly comment on the theme. Thousands of Tamil people were killed in the Tamil homeland, not because that there was lack of information from the part of the international community, but because there was a lack of political will. Every UN officer in Colombo knew the ground reality. So did every diplomat in Colombo, particularly the Western diplomats and Indian ones. What happened was there was a deliberate decision not to allow the final massacre to come to the public domain, lest it would create a humanitarian concern. So what happened, particularly in the last phase of the war, was not something that really connected to ignorance or kind of an omission, but connected to a deliberate, coordinated plan from the part of the international community. If we pursue an independent international investigation, what needs to be kept in mind is that this investigation not only should have, we have already more than enough evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. We should also know why the information was withheld. Who withheld them? Who did not want to expose the information? That is extremely important for an investigation to be independent. Second point is, now the information has come out through so many sources, through the commitment of so many actors. And this information is being again used by the same international community to discredit the Tamil national movement and put the blame on the Tamil national leadership. And thereby make the Tamils mere victims, not survivors who can articulate their political aspirations. Therefore, it is extremely important to identify the international complicity. The third point is, who are allies? At least we should find out who would be less culpable, who would be less complicit in this whole deliberate plan. And it was very clear during the peace process that there was a clear division of opinion and political stand in the international community with regard to the Tamil national struggle. One group in the co-chairs pushed a very strong militaristic solution, banning the Tamil political leadership and criminalizing them and legitimizing their extermination. But on the other hand, there were countries, particularly the European Union, who opposed the ban, who wanted to promote a negotiated settlement. It is extremely important for any investigation to be international that we identify who are allies and who are more complicit in the crimes committed by the Sri Lankan state against the Tamil people. So these are the 3 points I would like to mention as a start to the discussion. Let me first of all introduce our first speaker, Mr. Rajesh Sundaram from News Nation Television. He's the executive editor. He was the former news editor of Headlines Today, which produced a very good documentary with direct evidence from the Tamil homeland on ongoing genocide. And he will speak to us from a journalist's perspective about what was going on in the Tamil homeland. Over to you.
Like you said, I keep my part of the presentation, since there is limited time available, purely to the media aspect of it. I would want to go back to the time when, during the last stages of the war, I, as a journalist, was in Sri Lanka to report there, and there was serious denial of access to journalists who had a sense of what the background was, who had been to Sri Lanka before, who had covered various issues related to these issues. Now, the army there at that time gave access only limited basis to those people who wanted to be embedded, who did not want to ask questions, who did not have a background of the situation, who were very happy taking footage that was provided by the information department and take bites from the military spokesperson. They were actively encouraged not to report the other side of the war, and any network that did seek to get the other side was denied access in a very systematic kind of a way. I remember reaching Colombo, going through the entire process of getting my accreditation, going to the information department, going to the defense teams, and making sure that the card was there. At the last minute, when you're about to leave, they tell you that there's something wrong with the signature of an official who signed off on your accreditation card. And, you cannot go. The rest of the people would go. Also, there was a very well-oiled missionary to guide the media, to handle the media, if you will. They knew, especially the Indian media, was very obsessed with getting shots, with their reporters on top of tanks in the battlefield. So, when they knew that they had certain journalists who wanted to be embedded, they would allow them to come there, take them to the areas that they wanted to take them, and they would file those stories there. And journalists who did not want to do that, who wanted to do it in a more balanced way, were denied access in all of these cases. Anyways, no journalist was allowed anywhere close to the battlefield. No journalist went anywhere close to where these war crimes were alleged to have been committed. And this is perhaps the reason why the public opinion in India about this has been very muted, not only in Tamil Nadu, but in the rest of the country. I have been in Delhi, I've worked in Delhi, so I can give you a national perspective. At that time, when the war was happening, the news that was coming in was being filtered through certain sources, like I said. And the extent of the killings, the extent of the crimes that were happening were not being reported. Headlines today had tried through its sources to get information from the other side. We were getting video almost every single day through our contacts, and we were trying to balance our reports with what we were getting from Colombo and what was being given to us from the media wing of the Tamil Tigers. Balancing it out, both we knew were not from our reporters, both we knew were from sources which we had little control over. But we were trying to put both of those together and put the news out. But like I said, there was very little reporting of the kind of crisis that was happening there at that time. And if you ask me, till the time in 2011, when the Channel 4 documentary came out, there was very little awareness about this. Not in the rest of India, but even in Tamil Nadu, there was very little awareness about this. There have been organizations like the Journalists for Democracy, which from time to time, acquire trophy videos that were shot by Sri Lankan soldiers, put it out on the media. This was played up by headlines today. While there was a sense, because in India, whenever there is anything that comes, which is news from about a foreign country, you tend to go to the external publicity division of the Ministry of External Affairs. And the XP would dismiss these, they'd say, oh, there's no way to verify, I think you're better off not playing it. You give, and also part of the tough editorial standards, you call up the Sri Lankan MOD, and they would tell you these are morphed pictures, so what do you do? Well, you can choose not to air it, or you can choose to air it with what the Indian MEA is saying and the Sri Lankan Ministry of Defense is saying, and that's what headlines today chose to do. So while this footage came out, the trophy video that was shot by the soldiers, we took a strong editorial stance then. We took a stance that the India Today group, especially headlines today, would air these documentaries. But all of this changed really when our editorial team saw the Channel 4 documentary that was aired in the UK and it was available on YouTube, and we said, we have to put this on air because very little of this is available in India, and until a mainstream television channel took it and put it out there, there would be nobody who would know exactly what happened. So that was an editorial call. There was a decision that was taken that we air it. We got in touch with the agency that was marketing the Channel 4 documentary. We acquired the rights and aired it 4 times over the period of a week. And I can tell you there was a huge change in the way that the people saw this. Before this, nobody knew that war crimes, atrocities of this nature, what could be described by definition as genocide had happened there. When we put that out and we went back to the Ministry of External Affairs, I remember at that time the Foreign Secretary was, said that these are very disturbing visuals, but we would not want to comment. The second time it was aired, there was a lot of movement in Tamil Nadu. And also, when the parliament was in session, a lot of the parliamentarians now had this documentary which was in a, which they would put in a CD and wave during discussions in parliament. But right until this time, the extent was something that people did not know. I can tell you, I used to speak with activists who would come down to our newsroom sometimes and would have discussions with us. And they tell, we go to these members of parliament, and especially those that are not from Tamil Nadu, to make them aware about what happened there. They say, you tell me that the UN says 40,000 Tamil civilians were killed, but if they were killed, when were they killed? So they say in 2009. So they say it's 2011 now. How come I don't know about anything about this? And if it did happen, how come at that time the PMK or the other Tamil parties did not make a song and dance about it so that we would know about it? So clearly there was, this is the background to which we come on this. And even now, when the Indian media comes to the various issues related to this, there is a lot of confusion about the background and the historical facts, because there are a whole lot of people who have a vested interest in confusing the journalists when they make their reports. Television journalists, stories by definition would be about a minute and a half unless it's a long format. So there is a limited amount of information that you can put in there. So issues like the internal process for investigation, an international process that will investigate the war crimes, all of these are little known issues for journalists. And there's a whole lot of spin that's happening, especially if you look at from the Sri Lankan side, or even from the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. There is a sense that I see for the mainstream media journalists. There is a lack of information that there is needed, and the sources, the credible sources, the so-called credible sources that they go to, which is the Sri Lankan embassy or the Sri Lankan Foreign Office or the Indian Foreign Office, tend to misguide them on many of the facts that are there. While till the time that the ATP was there and they had a definite they had a media wing which was very effective, they got in touch with journalists across the world, and the journalists across the world would feature some of that, some of the facts. Some of the other side would come through reports that came here. But what has happened since the end of the war is there is no credible voice that's coming from the other side. There are various voices, there is a lot of work that's being done. But within the diaspora, the sense that we have in the media in India is that it's too many voices coming from too many places, and there's a lot of fighting on the semantics that is happening, in which is what is countering a multi-million-dollar well-oiled machinery that's going into the propaganda. That's what the Sri Lankan government is doing when it comes to Indian journalists, international journalists. So what is needed clearly is a clear, united voice from the various groups within the Tamil diaspora. Resources for the media to be available for Indian journalists, voices in the diaspora. That would give them a clear sense of the current issues, give them background, also a credible source for all the information that they may require for the background for that stories. That is missing. We have glossy magazines and publications that are brought up by the Sri Lankan embassy, which is mailed regularly to all journalists, but nothing that now is coming in any structured way, which will give them a balanced view or give them a full picture. Civil society groups in Sri Lanka, I know that they are under tremendous strain. But again, these groups too need to be connected with the Indian media, and they have to be given a perspective about what has happened. So while the Indian government debates, discusses and comes in, there's a lot of pressure on them right now because of the work that channels like Headlines Today have done, and currently there is a lot of new channels that have come up in Tamil space, which is doing a lot of good work to bring awareness about the public opinion. And I am sure that the weight of public opinion will force the representatives in Parliament to take actions that will see that there is justice, that there is an international independent investigation into the war crimes, and regardless of who perpetrated it, there's punishment as per international laws for those who perpetrated it. I'm told my time is up. Thank you very much.
The second speaker in the first session is going to be Mr. Mawai Senadiraya, Member of Parliament in Sri Lanka, Vice President of the Parliamentary Group of the International Eelam Alliance. He will speak to us about issues connected to land grab and how to stop continuous land grab in the Tamil homeland. Over to you, Mawai.
அனைத்துலக மக்கள் பேரவை நடத்தப்படுகின்ற இந்த நிகழ்ச்சி மிகவும் வரலாற்று முக்கியத்துவம் வாய்ந்ததாக அமைகின்றது. எங்களுக்கு இந்த அரங்கிலே சில வார்த்தைகள் கூறுவதை கிடைத்த சந்தர்ப்பத்திற்காக நான் நன்றி கூட கடமைப்பட்டிருக்கிறேன். இப்பொழுது முதலாவது அரங்கிலே குற்றவியல் அரசுக்கு எதிரான குற்றவியல் பிரேரணை தொடர்பாகவும் அரசுகள் பாதிக்கப்பட்ட மக்களை எப்படி பாதுகாக்க வேண்டும் என்ற அடிப்படையிலும் இந்த களத்திலே உரைகள் நிகழ்த்தப்பட்டு அதற்கான தீர்மானங்களுக்கு வரலாம் என்று எண்ணியிருக்கிறது. ஆனபடியால் இந்த அரங்கில் எனக்கு ஒப்படைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கின்ற பணி வர இருக்கின்ற இந்த பிரேரணை எங்களுடைய எதிர்பார்ப்பு ஐநா மனித உரிமை பேரவையிலே நிச்சயமாக நிறைவேற்றப்படும் என்று நாங்கள் நம்புகிறோம். இந்த அரசுக்கு எதிரான ஒரு பிரேரணை மிகவும் காத்திரமாக அமையும் என்ற நம்பிக்கை எங்களுக்கு இருக்கிறது. ஆனால் அந்த நம்பிக்கை இலங்கை அரசாங்கத்தை எவ்வளவு தூரம் பாதிப்புள்ளாக்கும் என்பதுதான் கேள்வியாக இருக்கிறது. ஆனபடியால் அந்த பிரேரணை மீது மிகுந்த பொறுப்பு வாய்ந்த ஒரு நடவடிக்கை திட்டமும் இடம்பெற வேண்டும். ஒன்றிணைக்கப்பட்ட ஒரு திட்டம் நடைமுறைக்கு வர வேண்டும். அதுதான் மிகவும் முக்கியமானது. அதன் ஊடாக தமிழ் மக்களுடைய இன அழிப்பு நடவடிக்கை எப்படி தடுத்து நிறுத்தப்பட வேண்டும், அதற்கு பொருத்தமாக அவர்களுடைய எதிர்கால ஆட்சி அவர்களுடைய தமிழ் நிலத்தில் இடம்பெற வேண்டும். அவர்கள் தமிழ் மக்களாக வாழவும் ஆளவும் தகுதியுடையவர்களாக இருக்க வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் மிகவும் முக்கியமான கருத்தாக இருக்கிறது. ஏனென்றால் கடந்த 60 ஆண்டுகளிலும் மாறி மாறி வந்த அரசுகள் எடுத்த நடவடிக்கைகளை விட போருக்கு பின்னர் 2019ஆம் ஆண்டு மே திங்களுக்கு பிறகு இந்த அரசாங்கம் கடந்த 3 ஆண்டுகளில் இனப்படுகொலை, இன அழிப்பு, நில அபகரிப்பு என்பவற்றிற்கு அமைச்சர்கள் மிகவும் உச்சமான நிலைமை அடைந்திருக்கிறது என்பதுதான் என்னுடைய செய்தி. அந்த அடிப்படையில் நான் சில வார்த்தைகளை எல்லோருக்கும் பொதுவாக நான் பேச விரும்புகிறேன். Conduct this seminar and a conference of the International Council of Eelam Tamil, inviting us to speak few words on the solution, that is international independent investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity. We On behalf of the Tamils of our nation, the TNA fully support including the resolution is going to submit before the Human Rights Council, and also we urge the nations, call upon the all nations who are participating and entitled to vote in the Human Rights Council to set up an international independent investigation into the complete conduct of the Sri Lankan state against the Tamil nation, and specifically call for investigation of war crimes, the crime against humanity and the crime of genocide against the Tamil peoples. We fully endorse this. We propose here also to take into consideration by the all nations for entitled to cast their votes in that council to pass a resolution. Not only pass a resolution, how the coordinated action plans would be as necessary to against the Rajapaksa regime, and also that kind of action and the resolution to be realized by the Sri Lankan, the mass, the people, particularly by the singular masses. That's only to be effectively implemented in our land, and to recognize our community's rights of self-determination, to establish their rule in their own land, the settlement land. What actually happened, particularly in the last 3 years, the Sri Lankan government to implement their agenda to eradicate the identity of the Tamil nation. Large extent of land belongs to the Tamil people, grabbing by the state and through the military forces. And firstly, they start to militarize. The secondly, to start to signalization and to eradicate the Tamil identity and the Tamil nation who they are agenda to implement and start to implement through their military forces. This is the responsibility to protect our land as a Tamil land, for rule our Tamil people themselves into the land. To protect our people, not only the affected people, the living people there. The response of the nation to give the protection. The Tamils are being Tamils, and to live there with the livelihood and rule themselves and the permitted and to recognize their right of rule themselves in their Tamil land. That is very important. In some other time, if we allow the states to continue the agenda to implement the Tamil areas, we have no land to rule ourselves. There are no Tamils in our land to rule themselves in their land. Therefore, I call upon, this is very important, this resolution, not only the resolution against the Rajapaksa regime, also very important, the nation's responsibility to protect the Tamil land and the Tamil people and the Tamil livelihood in our land. Thank you very much.
Very good morning to you all. I'll try and keep my comments as brief as possible. Just as an initial comment, the session that we are supposed to be speaking on right now starts off saying R2P and then goes on to talk of international independent investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm not going to say anything with regards to R2P in this session, because I'm due to speak on the second session with regards to genocide, and I'll make my comments with regards to R2P there. But for the purpose of this particular intervention, I'll be dividing my words into two sections. One is talking about war crimes and crimes against humanity. So dealing with that particular aspect, focusing primarily on the time frame that we must be looking at. Yeah? Because there is already a discourse with regards to war crimes and crimes against humanity that has already commenced in the international arena with regards to Sri Lanka. That time frame that is being suggested in the international arena right now is only with regards to the last stages of the war. So at best, we are looking at the last 3 years of the war, and at worst, since January 2009 till May 2009. So I'm going to contest that time frame that is more or less already in discourse, and I'm going to make the point that it has to be a much broader time frame. The second section is with regards to international investigation. And here I will make the point that obviously, if you look at what's happening now, the international element of that investigation is absent. So I make the case for not only insisting on the international aspect of that investigation, but also suggesting certain practical measures that has to be taken in order to make sure that that investigation succeeds. So let me start with war crimes and crimes against humanity. As I mentioned at the beginning, in today's context, I don't think we really need to make the case for the international community to accept the fact that war crimes and crimes against humanity had taken place in Sri Lanka. The fact of the matter is that that is already a given. The international community is acting on the basis that there is sufficient prima facie evidence to charge the present Sri Lankan government with regards to war crimes and crimes against humanity. It is on that basis that if you look at the March 2012 resolution at the UNHRC, it makes that case very clear. The question is with regards to whether the allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity can be limited to this present regime. Whether the way in which the war was conducted against the Tamils, which as a result brought about allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity, is only specific to the incumbent Mahinda Rajapaksa regime. That's the question that we need to answer. Because that is what the international community right now is trying to suggest. So it's a problem as far as the international community is concerned. It's a problem with the present regime. It is not something more systematic, as in it is not something that is evident right through the 30-odd years of war. Now here I think this is where we need to make a difference. Our contention as members not only of this conference, but hopefully outside as well, certainly as parties who have been affected by the conflict, directly affected as the target population, as Tamils, I think it is important that we make the case and make it very strongly from now on that this is not something specific to this regime. If you look at the last 30 years of conflict that has happened in Sri Lanka, war crimes and crimes against humanity have in fact taken place right through. So that's the first point. If we are talking about war crimes and crimes against humanity, we must look at the entire time period in which that war actually took place.
The second point is with regards to international investigations. I mean, we obviously in this conference are suggesting that it has to be international, but that is not the case. If you look at the March 2012 resolution that was passed, very clearly the proposers of that resolution, which is the United States, and all those who back that resolution is trying to limit it to a domestic mechanism. Right? So I think we need to understand the context in which that limitation is taking place. Because the people who want to talk about war crimes and crimes against humanity would rather have the investigations done in Sri Lanka locally so that it does not in any way embarrass a hopefully new regime that might take place, that might come into office in Sri Lanka. So our job or our task ought to be to insist, particularly in the context of what has been happening with regards to issues with regards to rule of law, with the breaking down of accountability, and the way in which the Sri Lankan state is conducting itself now, we must insist that it has to be an international mechanism that in fact takes place. And the second thing is, if this conference does in fact resolve that it has to be an international investigation, then the practical aspect of how that investigation is to take place must also be addressed. And for that purpose, and only for that limited purpose in this session, I would like to invoke the aspect of R2P, because my point is, if you are going to have an international investigation, then you have to create the ground situation in the island, particularly in the northeast, for witnesses to be able to come forward and in fact put forward evidence. If you do not create that situation, you're not going to have a successful investigation in order to have a proper result. And in that context, R2P has to be addressed in such a way where you create a situation, particularly in the Northeast, where you have a transitional administration that is created that goes outside the ambit of the present Sri Lankan constitution, where you have the international community as being observers and taking responsibility for the target audience, which is essentially the Tamil nation, to create a situation where there is safety, where they feel secure, and where they feel confident enough to actually engage in coming forward with evidence in order to ensure that a successful investigation takes place. Thank you very much.
For publicly stating that the internal mechanism has failed and highlighting the fact that there is a continuous violation of Tamil people's rights in the Tamil homeland. The next speaker will be Mrs. Mariela Learned. She is the Vice President of the Red Party in Norway and also the former leader of the women's organization in Oslo. She will focus on the necessity to build continuous pressure on the international community. Over to you, Mariela.
Dear all, dear Tamils and all friends of the Tamil struggle for justice and freedom. My name is Marielle Leron, and I'm vice leader of Red Party of Norway. I'm glad to be here on this important gathering to get information out in the world about what has happened in Sri Lanka and to challenge the international community, national governments, and the government in Colombo to accept the legitimate demands of the Tamil people. Our party supports the Tamil people in your struggle for justice and freedom. In the 20th century, there was a wave of liberations and new independent national states. This was also the case for Norway, and we got our independence in 1905. Unfortunately, not every people succeeded in establishing their own state or independence. The Tamils still today haven't got their freedom and have to live as second-rate citizens in Sri Lanka or in refugee in other countries around the world. Freedom is important for all people and is what makes us human. No one can live without the freedom to govern their own land and move and speak as they want. The Tamils don't ask for much. They just want the same as every other people in the world. They want freedom. The government in Colombo have made this wish further from being realized than ever before. The government have crushed the Tamils' wishes of freedom with great violence. The war against the Tamil Tigers ended with a massacre of innocent Tamils that the world still haven't fully opened their eyes for. In the last months of the war, the Sri Lankan army said they didn't want to hurt civilians and created no-fire zones where civilians should be safe. In reality, these zones were the opposite of no-fire zones, and the military exploited the high density of people to maximize the casualties. The military hit civilians with purpose. As a part of their terror, they launched second bombardments on the same places with a few minutes' delay. This way, they also killed those who tried to help the wounded from the first bombardment. Hospitals were deliberately targeted, even though they were clearly marked. The Sri Lankan army also made other crimes of war, including systematical rapes and execution of war prisoners. In total, more than 40,000 people were killed in the last phase of the war. It was difficult for the world to get information about the massacre because all foreigners had to leave because of the dangerous situation and the Sri Lankan government did not allow any information to get out to the world. Because of the voices of witnesses and movies from cell phones, the terrible truth is starting to come out to the world. In order to get lasting peace in Sri Lanka, it's important to have an independent investigation of the massacre in the last phase of the war. The UN must take action to start this investigation and create a special court that can judge the persons responsible for war crimes. All the missing and dead persons must be accounted for and the responsible punished. This has been important to get peace in former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda, where there have been similar conflicts. So far, the government of Sri Lanka have refused to find the truth of what has happened. It's clear that there will never be an honest investigation without strong pressure from the UN and the international community. We demand an international independent investigation of the crimes committed against Tamils in Sri Lanka. This demand must be supported from Norway and other nations. Even if the war is formally over, the Sri Lankan army is still occupying the Tamil areas of Sri Lanka. 60% of the Sri Lankan army is located in the northern areas, and a lot of areas of buildings are still not giving back to their owners. The Tamil people live as second-rate citizens without democratic rights. People are being arrested without trials, and there's a constant suppression of Tamil culture. Their land are being grabbed, and Singaleses are moved to earlier Tamil villages. The Sri Lankan government must end all suppression of the Tamils and pull back the army. If the government truthfully wants peace, they must stop the militarization in Sri Lanka and start behaving as one should in peacetime. It's no long-term solution to guard every Tamils as prisoners. The people must be given the confidence to rule their own land. Political prisoners must immediately be released. A lasting peace in Sri Lanka is in the interest of both the Tamils and the Sinhalese majority. But there can be no peace without freedom and justice. Everyone who has lost their loved ones in the war has the right to find out what has happened to them, and they have the right to see the people responsible for war crime punished. The international community must recognize the Tamil people as a distinct nation living in their traditional homeland with right to self-determination. This also includes the right of the Tamils to create their own parties and organizations. The Tamil Tigers was founded on the basis of Tamils struggling for their legitimate rights. We are glad Norway abandoned the banning of the organization. So must the whole international community, also the government in Colombo. The Red Party of Norway will support your struggle for justice, and we will do all in our power to push the UN and the Norwegian government to take the necessary steps to have the Sri Lankan government abide international conventions and stop the suppression and denying the legitimate rights of the Tamil people and nation. Thank you very much. And today, on this conference, we will work together for further successes in your struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariela. Last evening, I said she should have been facilitating the 2002 peace process in Sri Lanka instead of Mr. Eric Solheim. Thank you for focusing very clearly on the continuous violations of the Tamil people's rights and reiterating that they have a legitimate right to self-determination, nationhood, and homeland. The next speaker will be Dr. Krishnasamy, member of Legislative Assembly, Tamil Nadu. He is also from the World Tamil Protection Secretariat, and he will speak on how to put a full stop to the genocide of the government of Sri Lanka.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். First of all, on behalf of Pudiyam Tamilagam Party, for which I am the founder, president of, and also heading the chairman of World Tamil Protection Secretariat, which was formed in 2010 when I organized a conference, World Tamil Protection Conference in Coimbatore, and second conference at Kuala Lumpur. See, our party, Pudiyam Tamilagam Party, addressing our Eelam people's issues for last 30 years from 1984 onwards. First of all, I congratulate Anaithulaga Eelam Tamil Makkalaவை to conduct this very important conference at the crucial juncture at Geneva to insist and demand for an international independent investigations on war crimes committed against the Tamil people. See, Tamil people are fighting for their sovereignty for the last 60 years. In fact, their fight was about completely democratic and peaceful initially 30 years. Then the situation forced them to go for an armed struggle. That was branded as extremism by the world community, completely submerged the sovereignty struggle of the Tamil people, and the entire world community didn't bother to look about the Tamil people's sufferings under the Sinhalese majority. In this situation, during the 2008 and 2009 war, more than 2 lakh people have been completely killed. During 2009, May 17 and 18, about 70,000 people have been completely eliminated. About 3 lakh people have been completely put under open jail. Irrespective of all those things, even some of the important Tiger leaders who are willing to surrender with the white flag, even a 12-year-old son, the leader, Mr. Prabhakaran's son, he was caught hold and then he was completely executed. All those things slowly coming out to the world. But irrespective of all these violations, I don't know why this world community is still mum about these atrocities committed on Tamil community. I am very happy. Now in this conference, not alone Tamil people from England, Canada, Mauritius, from so many countries, more than 28 countries, there are so many Member of Parliament and other people representatives come forward to address the Tamil issues. It is not alone now the issue of a country, Sri Lanka, now it becomes an international issue. So now when this resolution is going to be taken up in the UN, on behalf of the Tamil Party and Tamil people, I insist there must be an international independent investigation so that Rajapaksa should be booked and he should be punished so that the sovereignty of the Tamil people will be restored. Before that, when Ms. Ponnambalam was speaking, he was telling about people should be allowed to come forward to witness. In that should happen, the military in Jaffna and also in entire north and east should be withdrawn. Then only there will be a amicable situation so that the people easily come forward, even dispose as the witnesses. So when we are insisting international investigation, independent investigation, we should jointly pressurize at least in this juncture, the world community should pressure Sri Lankan government to withdraw the whole military from entire north and east, at least so that the people can live peacefully, they can establish their own values and properties. Because countries, not alone this 2008 and 2009, still the grabbing of Tamil people's land, destruction of Tamil's identity, even destruction of Tamil people's temples, and like that, so many things are going on. So the withdrawing of the military is very much important. And also, I insist on one thing. When we want to have one problem to be solved, it should not be a continuous process. We have to put in full stop for these things. For this, see, in Tamil Nadu alone, 8 crore of Tamil people, it is a very big population. Throughout the world, 10 crore people are there. So what I feel, what I suggest is, there must be a permanent forum should be constituted by this conference, continuously travel to the world all over, unite all the community under one banner, put a pressure on the world community, and so that eliminate Rajapaksa and impose the economical blockade against Sri Lanka, so that something will definitely have an impact on this whole issue. That is the thing I want to emphasize. That is, we should unite together. We should not be split. There are even Sri Lankan Tamil people are spread over more than about 80 countries. It is very important that we should come under one banner, one voice, one organization, so that our voice will be more strong, more productive it will give result. So that is the thing I want to emphasize in this conference. For as a member of Legislative Assembly from Tamil Nadu, I here assure that we are working with the grassroots masses. Definitely, we will support your freedom struggle and we will be always with you. It is not a fair words, in deeds. Even from our student life onwards, we are supporting your struggle. We will be with you all along. So, wish you all success. Thank you.
ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையினுடைய மனித உரிமை கூட்டத்தொடர் இடம்பெற்றுக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது. அதற்கு முன்பாக அனைத்துலக ஈழத்தமிழர் மக்களவையினால் ஏற்பாடு செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கும் ஒரு கூட்டத்தொடர் இடம்பெற்றுக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது. அந்த வகையில் கூட்டத்தொடருக்காக கலந்து கொள்ள வந்திருக்கும் தமிழகத்தின் பேராசிரியர் மு. நாகநாதன் அவர்கள். வணக்கம். இந்த கூட்டத்தொடரில் நீங்கள் ஹியூமன் ரைட்ஸ் வாட்ச் மனித உரிமை அமைப்பு சார்பாக வருகை தந்திருக்கிறீங்க. நீங்கள் இலங்கையில் நடைபெற்றது எவ்வாறான ஒரு இனப்படுகொலையாக இருக்க போகிறது, இதற்கு உலகம் எவ்வாறான தீர்வை நோக்கி செல்ல வேண்டும் என எதிர்பார்க்குறீங்க ஒரு பேராசிரியராக?
இந்த 21ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் நடந்த இனப்படுகொலையிலே மோசமான இனப்படுகொலை இலங்கையில் நடந்து வருகிறது. எந்த நாட்டிலுமே நடந்த போருக்கு பிறகு மக்களை அணைக்க தான் செய்வார்கள். மக்களுக்கு நலத்திட்டங்களை அளிப்பதிலே அக்கறை காட்டுவார்கள். ஆனால் ராஜபக்ஷ அரசு இந்தியா உட்பட பல நாடுகளிலிருந்து பல கோடிக்கணக்கான ரூபாய்களை பெற்றுக்கொண்டு இனவாத கொள்கையை திரும்பவும் கடைபிடிக்கிறது. தமிழர்களுடைய வாழ்விடங்களை அழிக்கிறது. தமிழர்களுடைய பண்பாட்டு சின்னங்களை அழிக்கிறது. தமிழர்களுடைய நிலப்பகுதிகளை கைப்பற்றுகிறது. அது பாதிக்கப்பட்ட மக்களுக்கு ஒரு துளியளவு கூட உதவி போகவில்லை என்பதை பல அமைப்புகளும் பேராசிரியர்களும் பல கட்டுரைகள் வாயிலாகவும் நாம் அறிகிறோம். இப்பொழுது இந்தியாவிலிருந்து வெளிவருகிற ஒரு புகழ்பெற்ற பத்திரிகை கூட ராஜபக்ஷ அரசு $300 பில்லியன் அளவுக்கு இராணுவத்தை வலுப்படுத்தி இருக்கிறதாக சொல்லுகிறார்கள். ஆகவே போருக்கு பின்னம், போரிலே தமிழர்களை அழித்த பின்பும் படுகொலை செய்த பிறகும் இந்த போல போர் செலவை அதிகரிப்பதை உலக நாடுகள் வேடிக்கை பார்த்தால் நாட்டில் எதிர்காலத்தில் ஜனநாயகம், மனித நெறி, மானுட வளர்ச்சி எல்லாமே பாதிப்புக்குள்ளாகும். இந்த கருத்தரங்கில் மாநாட்டில் பல அறிஞர்கள் கலந்து கொண்டார்கள். பல நாடுகளினுடைய நாடாளுமன்ற உறுப்பினர்கள் கலந்து கொண்டார்கள். அவர்களெல்லாம் இந்த ஐநாவில் கொண்டு வந்த தீர்மானம் போதாதது. ஐநா ஏற்கனவே கொண்டு வந்த தீர்மானத்தின்படி இலங்கை அரசிடமே பொறுப்பை ஆய்வு செய்து பொறுப்பை ஒப்படைப்பது என்பது சரியாக வராது. ஆகவே பன்னாட்டு ஒரு விசாரணை தேவை என்று வலியுறுத்தினார். இந்த தீர்மானத்தில் பன்னாட்டு விசாரணையை வலியுறுத்தி ஐநாவில் இடம்பெற்றுள்ள நாடுகள் நடவடிக்கை எடுக்க வேண்டும் என்று வலியுறுத்தினார்கள். பல நாட்டிலிருந்து வந்த நாடாளுமன்ற உறுப்பினர்கள் இந்த ஈழத்தமிழர்கள் வாழ்வுரிமைக்காக தொடர்ந்து தங்களுடைய ஆதரவை தெரிவிப்பதாகவும் கூறியிருக்கிறார்கள். ஆகவே இந்த மாநாடு ஒரு வெற்றிகரமான ஒரு சூழ்நிலைக்கு முதல் அடியாக அமைந்திருக்கிறது என்பதில் சிறிது மையமில்லை. ஏனென்றால் ஈழப் போராட்டத்தை நசுக்குவதற்கு தொடர்ந்து ராஜபக்சேவுடைய பொய் பிரச்சாரத்தை முறியடிக்க வேண்டியது தமிழருடைய கட்டாயம் என்று நினைக்கிறேன். அதில் புலம்பெயர்ந்த தமிழர்களாக இருக்கட்டும், தமிழ்நாட்டில் வாழ்கின்ற தமிழர்களாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, இந்த ராஜபக்சேவுடைய பொய் முகத்தை கிழித்தெறிந்து தமிழர்கள் வாழ்வில் ஒரு அமைதியும் தமிழர்களுக்கென்று ஒரு தனி நாடும் அமைய வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் பெரும்பாலோருடைய விருப்பமாக இருக்கிறது.
சரி, இப்போ இந்தியாவினுடைய கொள்கை வகுப்பாளர்களிடத்தில் இந்த மாற்றம் ஏற்படுமா? அதாவது இந்தியா இந்த யுத்தத்திலும் மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு பங்கை வகித்திருக்கிறது. அதே நேரம் ஈழத்தமிழர்களுக்கு ஒரு சரியான தீர்வு திட்டத்தை முன்வைக்க வேண்டுமாக இருந்தாலும் கூட அதற்கும் இந்தியாவினுடைய கொள்கை வகுப்பிலே மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு மாற்றம் ஏற்பட வேண்டும். இந்த மாற்றம் ஏற்படுமா? இது ஒரு முதலாவது விடயம். அடுத்தது, பல்கலைக்கழகங்கள் ரீதியாக தமிழகத்தை விட்டுவிடுங்கள், ஏனைய பல்கலைக்கழகங்கள் ரீதியாக பேராசிரியர் என்ற முறையிலே இந்த இனப்படுகொலையானது அல்லது ஈழத்தமிழர்களுடைய பிரச்சனையானது எந்தளவு தூரத்திற்கு ஆதிக்கத்தை செலுத்துகிறது, எவ்வளவு தூரம் அவர்கள் விளங்கிக் கொள்கிறார்கள்?
குறிப்பாக நீங்கள் கேட்டது இந்தியாவுடைய கொள்கையில் மாற்றம் ஏற்படுமா என்று. மாற்றம் ஏற்பட வேண்டும் என்ற ஒரு அழுத்தத்தை தமிழ்நாடு இப்பொழுது கட்சிக்கு அப்பாற்பட்டு கொடுத்து வருகிறது. இந்த கடந்த ஒரு வாரத்தில் பல கட்சிகள் தங்களுடைய போராட்டத்தை அறிவித்திருக்கின்றன. காங்கிரஸ் நாடாளுமன்ற உறுப்பினர்களே தொலைக்காட்சியிலே தோன்றி இது இனப்படுகொலை என்று சொல்ல அளவுக்கு வந்திருக்கிறது. ஆனால் இதை டெல்லி தலைமை எவ்வளவு ஏற்கும், எப்படி இந்த கொள்கையை முழுமையாக ஏற்கும் என்பதெல்லாம் சிறிய ஐயப்பாடு இருக்கிறது. இருந்தாலும் போன முறை அமெரிக்கா கொண்டு வந்த தீர்மானத்தை நீர்த்து போக செய்வதற்கு இந்தியா உதவி செய்தது என்ற ஒரு குற்றச்சாட்டு இருக்கிறது. அந்த குற்றச்சாட்டை இன்றைக்கு தமிழகத்தில் பெரும்பான்மையான அறிஞர்கள், நடுநிலையாளர்கள் சொல்லிக் கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். குறிப்பாக சேனல் 4 வெளியிட்ட பிரபாகரன் மகன் இளம் வயதில் சுட்டு கொண்டதை பார்த்து தமிழகமே கண்ணீர் வடித்தது மட்டுமல்ல, தமிழகமே கொதித்து நிற்கிறது. அந்த உணர்வை டெல்லி வருங்காலத்தில் புரிந்து கொள்ளும் என்று தான் நினைக்கிறேன். ஏனென்றால் எப்படி இருந்தாலும் மக்களிடம் அவர்கள் நாடாளுமன்ற தேர்தல் வருகின்ற ஒரு ஆண்டில் அவர்கள் சந்திக்க வேண்டிய நிலையில் இருக்கிறார்கள். ஆகவே கண்டிப்பாக இலங்கைக்கு ஆதரவாக இந்தியா போவதற்கு வாய்ப்பில்லை என்று கருதுகிறேன். இருப்பினும் தமிழகத்தில் தொடர் போராட்டங்கள் நடைபெறுகின்றன. பல அறிஞர்கள் நீங்கள் கேட்டது போல தமிழ்நாடு பல்கலைக்கழகம் மட்டுமல்ல, இந்திய பல்கலைக்கழகங்களில் இருக்கின்ற பல பேராசிரியர்கள் இந்த போராட்டத்துக்கு ஆதரவு தெரிவித்திருக்கிறார்கள். குறிப்பாக உலக அளவில் இருக்கிற பல்கலைக்கழக பேராசிரியர்கள் கூட இதுக்கு ஆதரவு தெரிவித்து வருகிறார்கள். இன்றைக்கு இது மானுடத்தை ஈவு இரக்கமின்றி கொன்ற ஒரு ராஜபக்சே மீது நடவடிக்கை இல்லை என்றால் எதிர்காலத்தில் இது ஒரு பேராபத்தினை விளைவிக்கும் என்ற உணர்வின் அடிப்படையில் பல ஆய்வு கட்டுரைகள் தொடர்ந்து பல ஏடுகளில் வெளிவந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றன. ஒரு காலத்தில் ராஜபக்சேவை ஆதரித்த ஆங்கில இதழ்கள் கூட தற்போது இந்த படுகொலை மீது விசாரணை நடத்த வேண்டும், ராஜபக்சே மீது கடுமையான நடவடிக்கை வேண்டும் என்ற குரல் எழும்பியிருக்கிறது. ஆகவே இது ஒரு நல்ல சூழ்நிலை என்று நான் கருதுகிறேன். இந்த நல்ல சூழ்நிலையை தமிழர்கள் அனைவரும் ஒற்றுமையாக இருந்து அடுத்த நிலைக்கு தள்ள வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் என்னை போன்ற ஆர்வலர்களுடைய கருத்தாகும்.
ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையில் இடம்பெறும் மனித உரிமை கூட்டத்தொடருக்கான ஒரு முன்னோட்டமாக நடைபெற்று கொண்டிருக்கும் இக்கூட்டத்தொடரில் கூட புத்திஜீவிகளும் ராஜதந்திரியான உணர்வாளர்களும் அதே நேரம் தமிழின உணர்வாளர்களும் கூட பங்கு பெற்று கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். இவ்வாறான மாற்றத்தை பொறுத்த மட்டில் ஈழத்தமிழர்களுடைய அபிலாசைகளை வென்றெடுக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு வாய்ப்புகள் ஏற்படும் என நம்புவோம். டிவிஐ செய்திகளுக்காக தர்ஷன்.
If the UN was to seize it, to enhance their reputation as a body that has the ability to be meaningful. Otherwise, I think it would be very unfortunate for the United Nations. And I can tell you that the government of Canada, our Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister are very eager and enthusiastic to use the Canadian voice at the Commonwealth and at the UN to press for immediate action that goes beyond the internal mechanisms that the Sri Lankan government seem are adequate, because they are unequivocally not acceptable and will not realize peace or justice at any point. And thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to me once again today.
Intelligent and committed witness to what's been happening. I remember I wasn't there, but I remember seeing the protests in Toronto, and they were very inspiring, so well done to all those involved in doing that. I think our next speaker, I've known him for maybe 10 years. He's been working very diligently in a support team in Bremen, the International Human Rights Association. He's he's been allowed to visit the country more than once, Nikolai Jung, and he's also going to address the issue of genocide. And he in particular is going to look at the issue of genocide in respect of the yearnings and strivings of the Tamil people for nationhood.
Thank you very much. So, well, as Andy said, I've been asked to speak on the subject of genocide. But when I thought about the setup the audience would likely to be, I thought, why is it so important to talk about it at this time, at this place? Yeah? It's definitely not because of some kind of scientific interest or because we we should follow some kind of legalistic approach towards a very deep-rooted and indeed long-lasting process in Sri Lanka. And in my view, it's also today not just because of the urge to bring out the very concrete experience of the Tamils, because in this place everybody knows about it. Nobody in the audience would dispute the fact, in my view, that a genocide is taking place in Sri Lanka and it's ongoing. Every Tamil family has to mourn members that have fallen victim to a genocidal process that dates back as far as to the colonial period under the British, as Mr. Fernando has already pointed out. So in my view, it is important to talk about the Tamil genocide today because the genocide is inseparably connected to the aspirations of the Tamil people that determine their struggle. Both things cannot be separated from each other. Because we have to ask ourselves, why does this genocidal process continue to go completely unabated since today, since it started? It was not because the world hates the Tamils or the world would want to exclude the Tamils from mankind. It is because the aspirations of the Tamils clash with the interests of the most powerful nations of the world. The sad fact that has to be acknowledged is, as long as the Tamils strive for real freedom, they cannot expect any restraint, at least from these kind of nations. And this is a fundamental decision the Tamils have to make. When we talk about genocide, we have to ask, is there anybody around today who in the long history of oppression of the Tamils actually stopped this genocidal process at one point? The answer is no. Today there's nobody around. But there was a force who at one time in history stopped the genocide. It was the Tamils themselves who had to do it, actually. It was the LTTE who did it. In fact, the LTTE is the only force who ever achieved to open up the possibility to stop the genocide, even once and for all, and to bring a lasting peace to the island. In my view, there's no doubt about that. So how did they manage to achieve this? How did they manage to stop the genocide, at least for one certain period? So was it by defeating the Sinhalese army? I don't think so, because they did it before. After trying several times to use their military achievements to engage in peace talks, it was only at the end of the 90s that actually both the international and the local conditions were conducive for a peace initiative. And this was the outcome of a twofold struggle that the Tamils had to fight against internal and, more important, against external factors. Having achieved military parity with the Sri Lankan state by establishing itself as a conventional force with the capability to fend off attacks on the territory under its control, the LTTE not only forced the Sri Lankan regime into a ceasefire, but also it defeated those international forces that were backing a military solution to the conflict. As a symbol for this achievement stands the capture of the Elephant Pass garrison in April 2000 by the LTTE, leading up to the peace talks. The defeat of the US-trained elite 53rd Division and the capture of the strategic important Elephant Pass, whose deep defenses were deemed impregnable by US and British defense advisors to the Sri Lankan regime, meant that the US position of a military solution finally got weakened among the ruling circles in Sri Lanka. The defeat of the military solution by the LTTE allowed the model of so-called liberal peace, which was promoted by Europe to gain the upper hand in their competition with the US for influence on the Sri Lankan politics. The concept of liberal peace was promoted by the EU, by the European industrial powers, which were of the view that peace itself, meaning the absence of war, to be concrete, was a good thing, as it enables the market environment conducive for the production-based economies. Of course, it was no altruism involved here, but nevertheless, it was a progressive step. So in this sense, global security for them means first and foremost a peaceful environment for the economic activities. This position, in my view, is diametrically opposed to the approach of the US that depends on the control of raw materials and strategic locations as a military-based strategy to compete with economically more successful powers. This contrast of economic strategies by the US and Britain on the one side and the German-led European industrial nations on the other is also reflected in their different approach towards conflict resolution itself. the acceptance of the three premises: no military solution to the Tamil question, a constitutional settlement, and parity of status between the negotiating parties as a basis for their involvement, showed that the co-chairs for the peace process accepted the European line over the militaristic approach of the US and Britain. And it was only under these conditions that a peaceful solution based on a negotiated settlement could become reality. The decision of the LTT to offer peace talks to the Sinhalese was based on the confidence that Europe would grab the chance provided by them to them after being freed, at least temporarily, by the LTTE from the dominance of the US, and that it would stick to its progressive role it was playing in that part of the world at least. Yeah? So, unfortunately, this wasn't to be the case. But it was not the Sinhalese who changed the EU's mind. I will give one example about the EU ban. When 7 major countries of the EU opposed the banning of the LTTE, the Sri Lankan foreign minister at that time, Mangala Samaravira, had to travel to Washington to meet Condoleezza Rice, who then promised to make the EU change its mind. So, while proclaiming their support for the peace process, the US deliberately took steps to alter the military balance in favor of the Sri Lankan state. Britain and the US ensured that the Sri Lankan military forces were trained and armed to a much higher level than ever, while at the same time taking international measures to undermine the military strength and the political legitimacy of the LTTE. They knew fully well that it was the military parity between the Sri Lankan armed forces and the LTTE that had laid the basis for the peace talks to begin, and that it was also the key to its maintenance. So, in their view, it was, of course, not the LTTE itself that was the problem. They were representing the aspirations of the Tamil people, and the aspirations were the problem and are still the problem. So, even today, nobody should expect that now that the LTTE is gone, that the overall policies of the great powers would change. The reasons that were fundamental to support the restart of the war are still there. So, why is it important in this context today? If you look today, who could be your possible friends, it is imperative, in my view, to take the lessons from history into account. If you look for support inside the international establishments, if you want to do that, you have to look for those who oppose the return of war. In fact, if you talk about genocide limiting the allegations solely against the Rajapaksa regime without mentioning the international context, then there's a danger that the Tamils, that the atrocities that they had to endure will be used by those forces that are complicit in the genocide in the first place. So, apart from urging the Tamils not to fall prey to false promises, I urge those individuals and representatives of those nations and institutions and organizations who supported the strive for peace and justice of the Tamils and raised their voice against the return of war at that time to come forward today and join hands to work for real freedom of the Tamils. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is also from Europe. He's Antonio Marco. He's from Italy. He's a lawyer. He works for the Italian Refugee Council, which is an NGO. And again, he would like to make some observations about the persecution of Tamils and in particular that awful culmination in 2009. So I'd like you to welcome him to the platform.
Sì, grazie, scusate, parlerò in italiano. Tanto devo ringraziare il Consiglio dei Tamil in Italia per l'invito a partecipare a questa conferenza. Io mi sono rapportato con i Tamil in base al mio lavoro, all'attività di assistenza legale a favore dei richiedenti asilo. Ho da subito, come dire, sono stato subito colpito dalla crudeltà degli atti di persecuzione di cui sono state vittime ed è stato automatico per me affiancare quanto accaduto nei confronti dei Tamil con quella che è la definizione di genocidio dato dall'ONU, ovvero gli atti commessi con l'intenzione di distruggere in tutto o in parte un gruppo nazionale, etnico, razziale o religioso. Prego.
I'm very sorry, I should have explained. There will be a full English translation after this speech. Okay?
Okay. Se noi vediamo anche la storia dal momento in cui lo Sri Lanka ha raggiunto l'indipendenza dall'impero britannico, come vi sono stati una serie di atti che devono essere qualificati come crimini contro l'umanità nei confronti dell'etnia Tamil, che non ha mai avuto la propria rappresentanza all'interno delle stragi del 2009. Non mi riferisco soltanto alle attività di guerriglia che diciamo che si sono avute, ma quanto ai bombardamenti deliberati nei confronti della popolazione civile rivolta, bombardamenti che hanno riguardato quelle aree di sicurezza che erano state appunto create per mettere.
So I will summarize briefly the speech from Marco D'Antonio, who is an Italian lawyer. He's collaborating with the Italian Council for Refugees. He starts his speech thanking the Italian Council of Eelam Tamil for the invitation for this conference. So in Italy, he had the opportunity to meet the Tamil asylum seeker who reached the shores in his hometown, in Puglia, which is a region in South Italy. And from there, hearing their stories, he's aware that the Tamil people is escaping from their motherland because in their mother country they are facing really serious violation of human rights, and they had to flee the country for that reason. And it was immediate for him to associate the condition of the Tamil people, the crimes against Tamil people, with the definition of genocide from the United Nations. Then in his speech, he recalled the history of Tamil people, focusing the attention on the last 60 years from the so-called independence in 1948. And he touched different points in his speech. He talked about the Single-Only Act, the university reform in the 70s, the fire on the Jaffna Library in 1981, the Black July in 1983, and all the major events till the 2009 and the 2009 genocide, which is very well known among us. And then, okay, so he also talked about the last year Amnesty report, reporting the number of 12,000 civils under detention in Sri Lanka, and the last year facts, the video of the Prabharan's son. So he's really shocked from that video. He was stating that he's a civil, so he has the right. He was not even a fighter, so we have to investigate on that. And he concluded his talk calling UN for an international independent investigation on the crime against humanity and genocide in Sri Lanka, and is hoping for a political solution which can guarantee a long-lasting peace in Sri Lanka.
He's from the Liberal Party, and he was very involved, in fact, and has been very involved in supporting Tamil rights in his home country, and was one of those, indeed, blocking the roads in downtown Toronto 2009. So we're very pleased to hear from you, Jim.
Good afternoon. I thought we Greeks had long last names. And then I got a young man working for me that was Tamil. My last name is 11 letters and his was 14. And then we had a database system that allowed for about 22 letters to the last name. But then I encountered some Tamil last names and they had 30. So I had to adjust my thinking. And then that young man, after tsunami, said to me, "Boss, we got to go to Sri Lanka." And I looked at him and I go, "What do we got to go to Sri Lanka for?" He says, "Well, number one, let's go and see what's going on over there and see how we can help." And that's when I sort of started figuring that things in Sri Lanka were not going the best. But before we go there, let's take the definition of genocide. For those of you that don't know genocide, genocide comes from two Greek words, which means effectively killing of a nation. Genocide was not adopted at the United Nations until it was after the Holocaust, what the Jewish nation went through. But genocide was also done on the Armenian population by the Ottoman Empire in 1915, and then on the Pontian Greeks in 1917. Matter of fact, when Hitler was sitting thinking of his final solution for the Jewish population, August 1939, he said, "Who remembers the Armenian genocide?" Well, I'm a product of a genocide. My parents come from Asia Minor, my mother's side, and thus have been feeling the sword of the Ottoman Empire. And having born and raised in a refugee camp, I'll tell you what I seen in Sri Lanka was nothing less from what I experienced. So we arrived in Sri Lanka. Young man had gotten his passport, Canadian passport, but he was a Tamil. He had a Tamil last name. So to the government of Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese-run government of Sri Lanka, it didn't change a bit of iota that he had a Canadian passport. Wherever we went, he was questioned. Wherever we went, he was pushed. And wherever we went, he was looked upon in a different manner. We arrived at the first port that we did after the tsunami was Point Pedro, where our good friend that invited me to come home is. And we arrived at Point Pedro, and then we met a colleague in Sri Lanka, member of parliament. And then we crossed the ICI, the line of control, and we went into the we went into the LTTE controlled territory. Matter of fact, I believe that was the only Western politician after tsunami allowed to get into the LTTE controlled territory.
Mr. Burani, also a lawyer from Italy, to come to the platform. Is that okay? Thank you. This will also be in Italian, and we'll have an English translation afterwards. Mr. Butani represents Tamils in Italy. He fights with them as a lawyer to stop their deportation and to defend their human rights in Italy, and that's what he's going to speak about, the connection between the persecution of Tamils in Sri Lanka and the persecution in Italy. So welcome.
Sì, mi scuso se parlo in italiano perché il mio pessimo francese renderebbe incomprensibili i termini tecnici che dovrò in qualche modo usare. Mi scuso anche perché per stare nei 10 minuti sarò necessariamente schematico. Credo che quando si parla di genocidio, proprio perché sappiamo cos'è, vuol dire negare l'identità di un popolo e umiliarla fino a distruggerla, anche negare il diritto di resistenza di un popolo è un atto genocida. E lo ha commesso, lo commette il governo dello Sri Lanka, ma credo che ci sia anche nei nostri paesi in Europa, io parlo per l'Italia che conosco, una, come dire, connivenza spesso con questo tipo di situazioni. Ma non è l'Italia soltanto. La legislazione internazionale antiterrorismo, quella che è stata varata in particolare dopo il 2001, è una legislazione che colpisce in molti casi, in modo durissimo, le lotte per l'autodeterminazione dei popoli. Io in Italia ho visto celebrare circa 20 processi per terrorismo internazionale. Io personalmente ne ho seguiti 5. Abbiamo avuto 500 persone circa detenute con l'accusa di terrorismo internazionale. Di queste, di quelle che ho difeso io, dei processi che ho fatto io, erano circa 90 imputati, sono stati condannati in 16 e soltanto 10 di questi con sentenze passate in giudicato. Non di meno hanno passato in carcere, spesso e volentieri, molto tempo.
I'll summarize briefly the speech of the Italian lawyer Vainer Brani. The persecution and oppression of Sri Lankan government was reflected also in Italian context with the arrest of 31 Tamil activists in 2008 for international terrorism. They were defined terrorists because they had collected funds for projects in the de facto state controlled by the LTTE. They were accused to have relations with the terrorist group LTTE. But the judgment of Italian court has acquitted the 31 activists on the basis that they were not terrorists but freedom fighters. The LTTE so were recognized as a military group, not as a terrorist one. In fact, the judgment says that in this case, we have to apply the Geneva Convention and not the New York Convention against terrorism. So, the Italian court has recognized the right to resistance of Tamil people, and it has made really an important step in the Italian jurisprudence. Thank you.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.